Hello and welcome back to the Envirotech Online podcast, your regular guide to shifts in environmental monitoring technology and regulation. As always, I'm Jed Thomas, editor of Envirotech Online.
And I'm Alan Booth, senior editor here at ILM Media. Jed, today's episode is focused on a regulatory shift that could have major consequences for PFAS monitoring in the US and potentially ripple out to global monitoring efforts.
That is right. On November 10th, the US Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, announced a proposal to significantly scale back the PFAS reporting rule that had been finalised in 2023. That rule, introduced in the Biden administration, was the first of its kind to require detailed reporting on the use, importation, and environmental effects of PFAS chemicals going back over a decade.
So now, under the new proposal, many of those reporting obligations will be lifted or dramatically weakened. The rule would still sit under Section 8, brackets A, brackets 7 of the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, but it's been substantially redrawn. Exemptions are back, and alongside these, concerns about blind spots in environmental monitoring.
Yeah, so let's start by recapping what the original 2023 rule actually did. It required all manufacturers and importers of products that contained a wide variety of PFAS from 2011 through to 2022 to submit data on the substances contained in their products to the EPA. That included information on how those chemicals were used, as well as how people and ecosystems might be exposed and impacted.
And crucially, it didn't allow for the usual exemptions we often see in chemical reporting rules. No exemptions for impurities or byproducts, and no minimum concentration thresholds. This meant comprehensive end-to-end reporting across the board that could feed into environmental monitoring efforts.
Right, and for environmental professionals and regulators, it was a long overdue effort to map the full life cycle of PFAS chemicals and to build the evidence base for more targeted monitoring. But from day one, the rules met pushback from industry groups.
From the beginning, critics called it unworkable. They claimed that such a quantity of data could not be handled by existing IT systems, as well as both ambiguity and overlap in the reporting frameworks. And of course, there was cost concerns, especially for small and mid-sized manufacturers. The EPA itself estimated the cost of implementation at nearly $1 billion.
These concerns were the justification for this year's new proposal. Under the leadership of the current EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, a former New York lawyer and Trump appointee, as part of his broader Powering the Great American Comeback agenda, the agency is now looking to strip back the 2023 rule. Zeldin has said that this revised rule is about restoring common sense. In his words, the Biden-era regulation placed crushing burdens on American businesses, especially smaller firms. The new proposal aims to retain what he calls the core reporting requirements, but introduces a long list of exemptions. Let's go through a few of these. First, PFAS present in imported articles are now exempt. So if a company imports electronics, cookware, clothing, paints, etc. containing PFAS, they no longer have to report it to the EPA.
And next, PFAS in concentrations below 0.1% in mixtures or products are also exempt. Additionally, chemicals used exclusively for research and development, non-isolated intermediates, as well as certain byproducts and impurities are all carved out from reporting requirements.
The EPA is also asking the public to comment on whether there should be a volume threshold. One suggestion on the table is to exempt any PFAS produced or imported below 25,000 pounds in weight, around 11,000 kilos per year. That could significantly reduce the number of companies subject to the rule. So what stays? The look-back period is still 2011 to 2022, and companies are still required to report information they know or can reasonably ascertain. That's the due diligence standard under the TSCA.
But overall, we're looking at a much narrower set of reporting obligations, and the implications for environmental monitoring are pretty serious, even though it may seem that these changes can only affect manufacturers or products. So why does this matter for those of us involved in environment monitoring?
Because monitoring PFAS in the environment relies on this sort of data from manufacturers. We need to know where these chemicals are produced, how much of them there are, and how they enter the environment. When you remove reporting for imported articles in this way, you lose track of a major vector, requiring monitoring professionals to guess at where they need to be sampling. Most PFAS exposure doesn't come from handling raw chemicals. It comes from products releasing PFAS into the environment: waterproof jackets, non-stick pans, grease-resistant packaging, industrial coatings. If those aren't reported, regulators can't trace contamination back to its source.
And that's a huge problem for sampling design. Without detailed reporting, sampling becomes reactive rather than proactive. You might be able to catch contamination, but this will be an outcome of estimation and guesswork only.
And let's not forget how murky these supply chains are. Formulations change, new PFAS variants appear, Many imported goods don't disclose the composition of their PFAS at all. Without a reporting obligation, there's no incentive to be transparent and no systematic way to keep up with all of the variation in PFAS that are entering our environment. That opacity has consequences. Monitoring networks may miss emerging PFAS entirely. Remediation strategies may be delayed. And we may continue tracking legacy compounds while newer ones slip through the net. This is why the monitoring community is sounding the alarm. They argue that this rollback will hinder public access to PFAS data and slow efforts to reduce exposure. That is not a hypothetical concern. PFAS are, as we all know, persistent, mobile, and toxic. They're showing up in water supplies, wildlife, and even in the human bloodstream.
And this proposal fits a broader pattern. We're seeing it across a lot of the Western world, a shift towards lighter touch regulation. Many regulators are significantly less interested in closing data gaps, it seems.
So the Biden era rule marked a turning point, an attempt to gather data before regulating further. This proposal reverses that logic.
So where does this leave monitoring professionals?
Well, essentially with more uncertainty. Fewer reporting requirements mean fewer clues about where PFAS are being used and how they're entering ecosystem. That complicates everything from instrument deployment to risk communication to public health planning.
And it also changes the market with US federal oversight retreating. The states, agencies, utilities, academic labs and private firms, they need to take on more of the monitoring burden themselves.
Which could mean more demand for PFAS-ready instruments, more localized sampling strategies, and more emphasis on portability and selectivity.
But it could also mean fragmentation, with different states collecting different data sets and different participants using different protocols. That's not great for comparability or long-term analysis.
That's why at Envirotech Online we'll be watching this rule closely. Once it's published in the Federal Register, a 45-day public comment period begins. That's the window for monitoring experts to weigh in. And if you're looking to keep up with developments like this one, or want to build your expertise on PFAS monitoring more broadly, make sure you're subscribed for free over at Envirotech Online. We've got over 100 hours of expert-led video content, including case studies and technical workshops on PFAS.
Just head to www.envirotech-online.com and sign up. It's completely free and absolutely essential if you want to stay ahead of the curve in this space.
That's it for today. We'll be back soon with more on environmental monitoring policy and technology very soon.
Thanks for listening.